Yeah.
It's always
You
nice.
speak a little louder than he does.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Let's see. I'll get it a little closer to my mouth.
That's better.
Does that work?
Yep.
I've handed out a handout. Does everyone have one?
I need one.
Not necessarily. Okay.
No, I'll hand it out.
I can wander because I've got the microphone attached to me here. My thought is, back when I was in school, they said if you ever give a speech, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. Well, I'm not going to follow that exactly, but this will be a little bit free form because I think the first thing to do is to get kind of an overview of Koerner, which is what the objective of the handout is to do. And then we can talk a little bit more. Still can't hear.
A little bit louder. A little louder.
Well, I don't control the volume, but I can do it this way.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's good.
so I'll first of all do kind of a brief run through of the timeline. We can all look at it together and then no one will have reason to be distracted when we're talking about other aspects of Koerner. And of course, he was born in 1878 in London. I have a couple of maps on the table here where I can show you where London is in relation to other towns that were significant, because in contrast to most of the families I've known in Schleswig-Holstein, his moved around. He was born in London, his father was born in Flensburg, and his grandparents were born in Würden, and I can show you on the map where they are. Anyway, he was born in 1878. In 1881, his father apparently decided that he wanted to immigrate to the States and join his father's sister in Indiana. And there's a little confusion as to where in Indiana, because there's a town in Indiana in the west of Indiana called Linden, L-I-N-D-E-N, and another one called Clinton, C-L-I-N-D-E-N. And so they embarked. They apparently had considerable delays in getting to the States because, excuse me, it took 6 weeks. Well, my great-grandparents, I have, the name of course is Irish, but I have great-grandparents who are German, and their voyage, they left on May 12th and arrived in New York on May 25th, 1885, same general time frame. So I don't know why they were delayed, but they got to the town in Indiana with all their luggage. They're standing on the platform and nobody's there. And of course these are people straight off the boat, literally from Germany, so they probably only spoke Platt, which was what they spoke in Schleswig-Holstein then and even now. But they found somebody that they were able to communicate with at some level who asked them who they were looking for. And they said, well, you know, his father's, Mr. Koerner's sister. Well, she had died 2 weeks earlier. And her newly widowed husband didn't have the means to take them in. Now, Koerner's father was a master shoemaker, so he could support himself almost anywhere. And they managed to get the use of an unused school for a brief period of time, and went there, and he earned enough money making and repairing shoes in Indiana to be able to pay the cost to get to Clinton, which in the 1880s was a booming town. This is when the lumber barons' fortunes were being made. So they came to Clinton. And they settled. I imagine most people here have some idea where the courthouse is in Clinton, the building with the green tower and so forth. They lived within a block of the courthouse. Unfortunately, the houses that they lived in have been demolished. They were on a street that the railroad track that goes through Davenport that has the truck-eating bridge. That keeps going north and it goes through Clinton and it went right in front of their house, both houses. He went to the Clinton Grammar School, which was at that time built where the Clinton City Hall is now. In an interview that he had with, I think, the Clinton Herald in 1924, he said that he didn't like school very much. And in fact, he even dropped out for 2 years before he went back. And as you can see from the handout, he graduated in 1897. While he was in school, there was one of his teachers, Mrs. Gordon, I believe it was, if I remember correctly here, recognized that he had artistic talent and interest. And she encouraged him. And he took some art lessons from a Mr. Stish, John Stish, who was an immigrant from Bavaria. I've not found whatever became of John Stish, but I did look up Miss Gordon. She got married in 1905 to a fellow named Jacobson and lived until 1950. Her husband died in 1945. The interesting thing is, I kind of assume in those days if you were a school teacher, you could not be married. Because she didn't get married until 1905, by which time she was getting up in years. And her obituary did not mention that she was a teacher, but there's evidence that she was his teacher. Anyway, then he went to Chicago and talked himself into a job. He literally sat out in front of the editor's office and wouldn't go away until they gave him a job as an illustrator for the paper. And it turned out that he could produce some good things. And so eventually he kept moving up the ladder, his salary kept increasing. While he was at the Chicago Tribune, he went to the School of the Art Institute, and he also went to another school taught by, and I think I have the name here, Francis Smith Art Academy. When he was studying art in Chicago, apparently this fetching young lady caught his eye, Lillian Lusk, who was from Battle Creek, Michigan. And Lillian's father was a doctor who was friends with the Post family, from Post Toasties and the Post Cereal Company. And so his father died in 1902, and the year following, they got married. And he moved to Battle Creek briefly. He was the art editor for a magazine called The Pilgrim, and then went out east to study. Just a side note, which I have included in the footnotes here, when he was an illustrator for the Tribune, he developed a talent to be able to look at somebody and at a separate place and time make a very accurate drawing of who he had seen. And this was very helpful for the Tribune because they had him cover criminal court. And you couldn't draw in the courtroom, and you couldn't bring cameras in the courtroom, and cameras weren't very common then anyway. But once he had to draw a convicted murderer, and this guy didn't want to be drawn. So he put on prison garments. They put him in the cell with this murderer, a pretty dangerous guy from what I know or what I've seen. And he was there for 10 minutes, came out, made a very accurate drawing of this guy. And the other funny story, which I do mention here, is once he was covering a story about someone that had been murdered, and he went to the morgue and pulled the sheet back from what he thought was the corpse in the morgue, and it turns out he had awakened a very startled night watchman. So he had an interesting life in that way. Well, and you can see here in 1903 he and Lillian got married, and for their honeymoon they spent the night in the Palmer House, and then took the train to Clinton, where they stayed with his mother. who by that time, of course, was a widow. And one of the things that was kind of interesting, and let's see, where did I say this here? He, later, and in the 1924 article when he was interviewed, yes, down here, it said that he went to study art and saw a girl instead of the model that he was supposed to be looking at, drew the girl, and stopped studying art to study the girl, drew a proposal, she accepted, and his model sweetheart became his model wife. And that was really quite literal, because he used first his wife as a model for much of what he did, and then when he had children, the children served as models. And his son, we have here today, Velma Frame, the lady in the black jacket. She became good friends with his son.
Through the mail.
Well, through the mail, but they exchanged Christmas cards every year. And on the table here, I have a scrapbook that Velma put together of some of their correspondence. This ought to be kind of attached to one of my teeth, I think. Velma became a great correspondent, and she saved it, and I think it's a really priceless artifact documenting Bill Jr. Also on the table is a book by Gerhard Stoltz, and the person that did all the American legwork for him in doing the book was Velma. And it sort of reminds me, I don't know how many people here are fans of Johann Sebastian Bach, but as you know, he was born in 1685 and was, you know, a pretty good music composer. And by the 19th century, people didn't pay that much attention to Bach. And Felix Mendelssohn appreciated Bach and really generated a new interest in Bach. And in some respects, Velma's done that with W.H.D. Koerner, because at the time that Stoltz was preparing his book, you know, there weren't a whole lot of people, especially not in Clinton, his hometown, that knew much about him. And Velma was active in the Historical Society, and so I think we all owe Velma a debt of gratitude.
Thank you.
Well, let's see, we have Koerner getting married, going out to the East Coast, and as I say, his father-in-law was friends with the Post family, so one thing that he did early in his career was he did a lot of illustrating for Post, for their advertising and this sort of thing.
Boxes.
Pardon?
On cereal boxes?
Well, and also advertising in magazines and so forth. But then he was able to go out and study in the East with the same fellow that, one of the foremost illustrators of the early 20th century, Pyle. And Pyle, when he was no longer active as an illustrator, had a school where, I don't know how many of you know Andrew Wyeth, who's a more recent painter. His father, N.C. Wyeth, studied with Pyle. And all of these experiences changed the way he drew his art. And I have some examples to show you here in a minute. But as he evolved, you know, there were aspects of his art that changed. He got married in Wilmington, Delaware, and he and Lillian had 2 children, a son and a daughter. The son, I've already mentioned, became good friends with Velma. And one thing that has always interested me is when you have someone that has had considerable achievement, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. So I took a look at, you know, his father was a master shoemaker, I mentioned already. His grandparents, his grandmother's maiden name, as it happens, was the same as my great-grandmother. And they they lived about 10 or 15 miles apart.
Hmm.
So I'm going over this summer for the conference that is held every year from ASHIS, the group from Walcott, and I would urge anyone that has the slightest interest to consider going. But one of the things I hope to do this summer is to see if I can establish whether or not I'm related to Koerner.
That would be great.
Given the fact that his grandmother and my great-grandmother had the same family name, and it's not that common a family name. Anyway, he then began drawing covers for the Saturday Evening Post, and that was really transformational. And once he started drawing covers for the Saturday Evening Post, he did that as long as he could paint. He also illustrated books of the West. Books by, I imagine most people here are familiar with Zane Grey. And in fact, I've got a 2 or 3 page list of books that he illustrated that are all books about the West. And, some people would recognize more authors than others, but he was very active in that. He was very thorough. When he started drawing pictures of the West, he went out there, beginning in about 1924. He went to Cook, Montana, which, if you've ever heard of a one-horse tank town, I don't think it even made that list. A pretty small place. I think it had 70 people at that time and doesn't have many more today. He lived and worked with the cowboys, sketching while he was there, and he was so diligent in that subsequently, when they made Western movies, they would refer to his paintings. He worked with John Wayne, for example, another Iowan. And that was not only because he could very accurately represent how they were dressed, their costumes, but how they held themselves, how they moved, what the settings were like. And so he turned out to be kind of a darling of Hollywood. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is all of his descendants, virtually all of his descendants, were connected with art, one way or the other. His son was more on the business side of art, and he had a granddaughter in St. Louis who was a professional portrait painter. And he has a great-granddaughter who lives and works in New York, who collaborated in the memorial for the 9/11. And I don't know how many people here are familiar with the High Line in New York. That's relatively new. But they took an abandoned elevated train line, and instead of tearing it down, they landscaped it and made a walking, running trail out of it. And part of the landscaping involves works of art, and his great-granddaughter has a piece of art incorporated in that. So I think everything else I have here you can read, and I will. This was his father, and you don't see it very well, but his jacket has some medals on it. I haven't been able to find out where the medals came from. His father was born in 1847, so he was born too early to have participated in the Schleswig-Holstein War for Independence. He might have served in the Franco-Prussian War, but I don't have any evidence as to how he served, which is presumably the way he got those medals. This is a little hard to see. This is from the Schultz book, and it shows an early drawing he has of Clinton. I won't try and, I could translate it for you if you wanted, but I don't think that's... Here is a picture of London. You can see that London barely escapes the one-horse tank town description itself. And there is a Koerner museum now in London.
And why?
Yeah.
Because of Velma. And The guy who basically set it up and operates it over there is Henning Peters, who is known to some of the people in this room.
Because we had a tour there.
Yeah, the
Conference, our conference was there.
Ashes had a conference there a number of years ago. And he's come to every other year, they have the conference in Germany, and then in the intervening years, they're in the United States. They had, last year's conference was in Moline, and 2 years before that, it was in Clinton. Anyway, this is...
Mike tells them that London didn't even know about their famous
Oh, yeah.
child.
Thanks. Here again, you know, Velma was the Felix Mendelssohn of our day.
Oh, no.
She was the one who
It was,
informed London that one of the children born there had made some great achievements. And perhaps the greatest achievement is, and I'm jumping here a little bit, but one of Koerner's paintings hung in the Oval Office during the entire term of the 43rd President of the United States. And as far as I know, it's the only painting by an Iowan to ever hang in the White House. And it hung in the governor's office when he was governor.
You're gonna be able to show that painting.
And I not only have that in the slides I have here, but I wrote an article about it in the Clinton newspaper, and I have that here. So here's another picture of Clinton that he drew when he was a child, and here's a picture of him and his sister with their father. And here is Clinton at that time, showing where he lived and where his father had his shoe store, or his shoe repair business. Clinton wasn't very big then. And this was before Clinton and Lyons merged. Clinton is an amalgamation of 4 different municipalities. So it was quite a bit smaller then.
But they had more millionaires in Chicago at that time.
Well, I don't know how many Chicago had, but they ultimately had, at least on a per capita basis, an awful lot. His parents are buried in Clinton in Springdale Cemetery, and this is their tombstone. And it's kind of, the house on the left here is the house they lived in that faced the railroad tracks. And the house on the right is the one where his mother lived after her husband had died.
And it's still there.
And that's still there. And then down below, of course, is his mother. And I frankly think that's the house.
Doesn't matter.
Their last house was across from where Clinton's jail used to be. Here's his certificate of graduation from the Clinton Grammar School. I mentioned earlier, he was not a very enthusiastic student. He did not like school. And so in the time he was growing up, Clinton High School existed, but he apparently did not go to Clinton High School. He finished the 8th grade, and he was out of town. And this is just from the city directory.
Who was calling?
And let's see.
couldn't have done it in Clinton.
No.
This is the painting on the right was his wife Lillian as a young woman, and I would say a very attractive woman. No wonder she caught his eye. And the other picture is apparently Lillian with their probably with their son, right? I think he was first born. When he worked for the Tribune, he also did like comics. And so here are a couple of examples of his comics. Here he is with his sister, sitting on the step of what I assume is the house that faced the railroad tracks. That's where they would have been when they were that age. And that would have been presumably fairly soon after they got to Clinton, because he was 3 years old when they got to Clinton. Well, would have been a couple years after they arrived, I think. Here's a painting he did of the riverfront in Clinton. Now, here we have one of his paintings of the West. And one of the things, at least that struck me, is his paintings always seem to show people doing things. He doesn't have static
Like a
photos.
still life.
Yeah. And I wish you could read that a little better, but this is the Alcalde's welcome in Taos. Well, again, I don't know how many of you know Spanish, but the Spanish word for mayor is alcalde, so he's greeting the mayor of Taos in this painting. Well, this shows action, doesn't it? And this is an Arapaho attack. This was painted in 1931. And this is the way it appears in Hutchinson's book, which is the larger book over there. And here is, this is titled Before the Railroad Came. It was painted in 1916, so this was before he became focused on Western scenes. This is Boone's daughter, and I hate to think of what he was representing here with Boone's daughter being captured by the Indians, it looks like. And this is called Bucking on a Dime. This was painted in 1923. Now, if I were teaching an art history class, which I'm manifestly unqualified to do, of course I'd have these paintings all in order and I would highlight how his technique changed as he evolved. But I'll let you do that on your own. This one is called Coming Home, and I don't have a date for that. And this is just a composition he made for a Saturday Evening Post cover. This one is called Crow, Chief, and Warriors. And this is Feathers, Buckskin, and Beads, painted in 1931. This one is called The 4th of July Street Scene, painted in 1922. So here again, this is before he started focusing on the West. This is called Fremont at Monterey. Fremont, as you know, was a pioneer in California. Now here's Girl in a Hat. To me, this kind of looks like he was impressed by the Impressionists.
Yeah.
It has that sort of character to it, I think. I don't have more information about it, however. This is one that I think you might see frequently, called Hard Winter, painted in 1932, showing, you know, I don't know if any of you have been in Montana in the wintertime, but I'm glad I haven't been. Let's see, this is haying time. Just some photos, I don't have a date for that. This one is called High Country Rider. This would be after 1924, so by that time he'd been living and working out in Montana. This one is called Indian Territory Demand for Tribute. So the story I interpret out of this is that the settlers were moving west and the Indians wanted their rent or their payment, much like the robber barons on the Rhine did, where they'd lower the chain in the river if you didn't pay their toll before you went further. This was painted in 1927. They spent some time in Massachusetts, in Gloucester, I think it was, and that was undoubtedly the inspiration for that particular painting. This was done in 1929. I don't know the name of it offhand, but it's clearly from the West. This was from 1930. This was, I don't have a title for this, but obviously a pioneer photo. And I'll move quickly through some of these. But you'll notice that they tend to always be doing something in all of his paintings. This is the, I think it's the, yes, this is the obit for his art teacher when he was at the Clinton Grammar School. I'm sure you can't read it, but it's just to show I did my due diligence. This is called Lost Ecstasy, painted in 1927. And this is called Lumberjack Brawl. And it's pretty hard to see there, but when you have a little better view. I like this one a lot. This is called Madonna of the Prairies, the Covered Wagon, painted in 1922. And of course, this is a woman sitting in the front of a stagecoach with the back of the stagecoach sort of forming a halo around her head. And here is Cook, Montana, Cook City, Montana, Main Street. This is the main drag in Cook, Montana, that he painted in 1934. And this is from one of the Christmas cards that his son sent Velma. And his son tended to use some of his paintings for his Christmas cards.
Is there one that he's most famous for?
Well, in my view at least, certainly the one he'd be most famous for as far as the general public is concerned is the one that hung in the White House.
Yeah.
But, you know, I suppose everybody could have their favorite. There are different times and different subjects and different styles, so I wouldn't want to get too far into that because, remember, I'm an electrical engineer. Anyway, this has quite a bit of drama, prairie thunderstorm. This certainly shows some movement. He just always likes to have people doing things, and often doing things that are high tension. I would call this a high tension thing, you know, soldiers. This is called The Homesteaders. And interesting thing here, of course, is how many trees do you see there? You don't. The Great Plains didn't have trees. And this is the Posse Rode Fast. This is the price of the Old Northwest. Looks like some people are about to get attacked. This is called The Ships Must Sail. This is called The Hunters. This is Through the Mud to Glory, another war painting. Vaqueros. Well, again, if you know Spanish, the Spanish word for a cow is vaca, and vaqueros are cowboys. And this was one that he painted, of course, when they were out in Massachusetts. This one is called When a Saddle is No Obstacle, painted in 1932. And this is called When Men Rode Free. Now here he is at the school. He is the guy with his arms crossed, standing in front of the pillar with his foot up on the step there. And these are the other guys he's with. Guys and one gal. This was in Delaware. I could read the names off, but I'm not sure that would be. This is the Cody Museum in Cody, Wyoming. And when he died in 1938, his widow donated the artifacts from his studio to the Whitney Gallery in Cody, Wyoming. And this is the way they had it set up. And you'll recognize some of the paintings on the wall that I've just shown you. Here's the Madonna of the Prairies on the right, and I forget the title of the one on the left. And this is the various times and places where there have been exhibits and museums of his work. This was, of course, Delaware Art Museum. Here he is with his mother, sitting out in front of his house, and this would have been the house that's now demolished that sat along the railroad tracks. And one thing that's, for me personally, interesting his mother strongly resembles my great-grandmother, who came in 1885, 4 years after they did, from Schleswig-Holstein. And this is the picture that is on your handout. And here he is with his son and daughter. Here he is in his studio in Interlaken, New Jersey. And again, there are some of the paintings you see there that have been reproduced in the books that I've scanned. This is called A Charge to Keep.
The White House.
And this is the painting that was in the Oval Office.
That one?
And
Say that again, a charge to keep louder.
the name of this painting is A Charge to Keep. Now the interesting thing is, there are a lot of people who have researched this painting, and this was inspirational for the president because for him it represented someone with a duty who would go to all his available means to live up to his responsibility, etc. In fact, according to people that I've read, it was a painting of a robber trying to escape. So, you know, depending on your political point of view. Anyway, after the president left office, he published this book and used the title of the painting as the title of the book and had a reproduction of the painting on the
Cover.
dust cover.
Who was the president?
Him.
I just answered your question. You recognize that guy?
W.
George W.
Thank you.
And over his shoulder, and again, you can see it better here. Unfortunately, this is fuzzy, but that's the painting over his shoulder. And then this, I assume, is the official portrait of him. And here again, the painting is incorporated in the portrait. And here he is showing somebody the painting when they were doing a tour of the White House. And I know it's hard to see that. Here he is talking with the 44th President of the United States in the Oval Office with the painting on the wall behind him. So again, no matter what your political affiliation, we got both sides here in this photo. And then here we have the exhibit that Velma helped organize, right? Where,
When was that?
when was this? This was 2003.
In London.
Oh,
This was from the Flensburger Tageblatt. So this was an article that appeared in the newspaper in Flensburg, Schleswig-Holstein, that talks about this picture.
I'm not familiar.
And here we have a photo of George H.W., Obama, George W., Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter, all in the Oval Office. And the painting you can see is Koerner's painting behind all of them. I think if you're a painter, it doesn't get much better than that. And bipartisan, you know, we got everybody in the same room and nobody got into a fight. This was his granddaughter, Diane, and these are some portraits she did, including of Arnold Palmer.
That was his daughter, Mike. That was young Will. Well, yeah, it would have been.
It'd be young Will's daughter. It'd
Yeah.
be
His granddaughter,
That's
yeah.
right. She was famous.
his granddaughter.
Mhm.
And this is the great-granddaughter who this was the granddaughter again, Diane.
Mhm.
And one thing that was interesting for me is when I was trying to research this, the first thing I do when someone has died is try and find the obit. Couldn't find an obit for her. So then I made some further inquiries. She and her husband went to the Principia in St. Louis. And I happened to have some friends connected with Principia, so I asked them. And they were friends of hers, of her and her husband. She died just recently
Yeah.
and was cremated, but I couldn't find an obit. And then I discovered she was cremated and the remains were never picked up. So one thing I discovered, and my best friend ever since high school is Christian Scientist, and he talks about living in the now. But that's as far as it went. We never discussed religion. And apparently Christian Scientists believe that you can't do anything about the past. That's gone. The future hasn't happened yet. What matters is what
No.
happens now. And apparently, at least in that family, the way they interpreted that was, once you're deceased, it's over. And they don't necessarily, have the ceremony we have associated with death and funeral.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Anyway, this is an exhibition that his granddaughter gave in St. Louis. And then here was an article that was in the Quad City Times, I think. Well, it was, Quad City Times about Koerner. And I won't try, I can't even read the print here. Here we have Koerner collection headed for Germany
Oh, yeah, there I am.
with
That's long.
Velma in it. And
Long time
this
ago.
is the book written by Hutchison that I have on the table over here. The girl holding it is the granddaughter of my former commanding officer when I was stationed in Germany in the Army, who just completed her master's work in education, art, and what else? And she just ended up with 3 degrees. Oh, in English. So I gave her a copy of it. And here she was in Clinton. Clinton is the sister city of Afta, which is where my great-grandmother came from. And so Afta gave us a sign, and that's now in City Hall in Clinton. And here's an article that was in the American Schleswig-Holstein Heritage Society magazine that by a fellow named Hans Werner Hermann, who has apparently established, we've got more people with roots in AFTA who live in Iowa than they have in AFTA. So that's sort of my prepared remarks. I would like to make a plug again for the conference.
In after.
In AFTA, that's right, this summer. And I would invite you to take a look at some of the things I have on the tables here. I have the 2 main books, as well as Velma's scrapbook, and articles that I wrote for the Clinton Herald, and some maps. So you can see where all of these things took place. Does anyone have a question? I see a hand in the air. I see 2 hands.
I was wondering, the Indian paintings, basically were in the 1920s and 30s.
Uh-huh.
Now, were those, at that time, were the Indians on reservations, or how did, what do you use for models? I mean,
Well,
I'm assuming that it was depicting something of earlier history? Or?
yeah, I think the reservations were set up at the time of Custer, as a matter of fact. And so I don't think that there was any, I haven't studied the history of the Indians.
Yeah, but tell them he went out with the family, the kids and wife, and they lived
Well, I mentioned
out there.
that. Yeah,
And
he
there
would
was a
spend the
big-
summer
Yes, they.
in Cook, Montana, and
Uh-huh.
work with the cowboys and sleep
Mhm.
out in a tent. And he had his wife and 2 kids with him. So you got to hand
Really
it,
studied them.
particularly to his wife. But
Hats off to her.
give credit where credit is due. But yeah, they freely associated with cowboys and Indians, and so he was, as I say, he was diligent. He would research what he was doing to make sure it was accurate. Good, thorough German.
So Hollywood had it easy later on because
Yeah.
of all those movies.
Well, this was
Right.
during the 20s. He was doing this when Hollywood was making Western
Right.
movies, and Western novels were very popular then. And I saw another hand up. Go ahead.
Do you know where the bulk of his work is now housed? Where can we see his work?
Well, I know you can see at the Cody Museum, at the Whitney Museum in Cody, Wyoming, they have some of his works. An embarrassing story. The Art League in Clinton, in their inventory, says they have 4 of his works, but they can't find them.
No, that's not true.
Those are probably the ones that they sold to the
The others are
Germans.
just possibly in storage somewhere that we don't know.
Yeah, so it's a mystery. But the Historical Society in Clinton has one of his watercolors, I think, isn't
Yeah,
it?
4 of them. They sold them. Henning came after them.
London got them.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
and so
museum
some are in
in-
London.
In Germany got them.
Yeah, and I would imagine, you know, I have never seen any comprehensive list of where they are located. I can tell you, I saw in an auction in 1998, I think it was, one of his paintings sold for over $200,000. And I thought I had it in here, but it didn't make it. I had, I went to an auction house and saw what they had sold his paintings for. And they had sold one of his paintings for $135,000. I think between 30 and 50 is a more frequently seen price for his works.
Especially the later
Yeah.
ones.
Now, somebody did have one on the antique show, you know, on
Uh-huh.
and they said it'd be worth about 150,000. That was several years ago.
But-
Yeah, well, if he sold one at one
No,
point
it
for
was
200 and some
more like
odd thousand,
scenery.
it seems reasonable that that would be
About 150.
something.
What about
people
our
might-
Historical Society? They have some pictures there.
No, they sold them to the Germans.
Our Historical Society just had an exhibition. Are they copies?
No, what's in the historic, Clinton County Historical Society is theirs, and it's not a copy.
Okay, our Clinton Historical Society.
Correct.
You can see a little exhibition of it.
Yeah,
The one in the
it's a watercolor, it's not an oil.
This guy from TV here was just there. Maybe-
Yeah, I don't know if you
Fran
saw
Riley.
the program that Fran Riley had. Fran Riley
Fran
did a
Riley
story
was
about
there?
that just recently. And you can go to Channel 6's website and see the Fran Riley features, and you can see what he did, what he said. Sir?
The picture, I think, of his dad with the medals,
Uh-huh.
that one of the medals looked familiar to one of the shooting medals that the King shooters got at the Schuetzen Park back in the old days. And even though he's from Clinton, he may have been a member of that shooting society. Possibly, you might know whether he took up shooting rifle when he was out west, you know.
No, but that was his dad. His dad.
Yeah, his dad is the one with the medals.
That was a Schützenpark in Germany.
And his dad never, as far as I know, never got further west than
I'm talking
Clinton.
about in Davenport.
Yeah, but his dad never.
Who knows? I don't have any information one way or the other as to whether he came down and participated in the Schuetzen Park. It just looked to me like maybe those medals had a military significance. And of course, shooting has
Yeah,
a
but the
military
Schützenpark in
significance.
Germany and here, it was an imitation of German Schützenpark.
Of
Our
course.
Schützenpark
Yeah.
here. So the dad might have belonged to a German
Maybe.
Schützenpark.
I don't have any way to
Schützenverein.
establish that
And
one
got
way
a
or the other.
medal.
Might be a connection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I'm sure they imitated a lot there.
Any other questions?
You have a rough idea how many works he did?
Oh, hundreds.
Yeah, it seems pretty
His
prolific.
inventory was pretty substantial.
Wow.
And somewhere here, I don't know exactly whether I mentioned it or not, but I know that he had,
Over 600 you've got there.
yeah. See, yeah, right here, painted over 600 pictures for periodicals. One thing that was kind of interesting is he painted them in color, even though frequently when he was illustrating a book, it was going to be reproduced in black and white. And initially, he would make a drawing and submit it to, say, the Saturday Evening Post, and it would disappear. And then he decided he'd like to have his drawing back after they had painted it.
Right.
And that wasn't crazy. Any other questions? If not, I would invite you to take a look at the displays we have here. And maybe that'll generate some more questions. Thank you very much.
I can make one more comment, or actually two. First of all, thank you very much for this afternoon's presentation. We appreciate you coming up. Programs like this have to be developed from somewhere, and we appreciate the support of the Humanities Iowa for helping to provide financial support.